Hey guys, welcome to Cru. My name's Sean.
I'm Lydia.
I'm a senior studying paper science and chemical engineering.
I'm a senior studying business administration and marketing.
We're so glad you guys came out to Cru tonight, whether you're connecting virtually or you're in person.
A little bit more about Cru is that we're a Christian organization on campus that works to connect people with Jesus and others.
Tonight you guys are going to hear a story from one of our students, a talk from a staff member, and you guys are going to break out in discussion groups.
Hey Sean,
What's up?
guess what?
What?
A fun fact about me is that I love kickball.
No way, I love kickball too.
No way.
And that's crazy because tomorrow, September 4th, we're going to be having kickball at the intramural fields. It's going to be from 3:30 to 5 o'clock.
And even better, we're both captains and we'd love to see you there. Next, Picnic in the Park is September 7th, which is Monday, Labor Day. We're meeting outside DeBow at 10:30 a.m. to go to Buchelt Park. Sign-ups are required, so go to Facebook as soon as you can and sign up.
Also on September 7th is a scavenger hunt, which will be from 3:30 to 5 o'clock. You guys can meet outside the DUC to go do that event, and then afterwards we're going to have ice cream.
Where my ladies at, Mug and Muffin is not this Saturday, but next Saturday, September 12th, between 9 and 10 a.m. We're meeting outside the DUC at 8:50 in the morning to walk over to a student leader's house. You bring the mugs, we'll bring the muffins, and it'll be a great time to meet others.
Throughout the semester, we're going to be having Bible studies for men and women, both in person and online. We also have movements like Athletes in Action, Destino, Epic, and Impact. You guys, if you join us in person, you'll get a card which will have all that information, or you can access that on our website.
Speaking of our website, it's UWSPCru.org. Another way to find us is on Facebook and Instagram, both at UWSP Cru. These are great ways to stay up to date on all the new things and changes that are happening.
Next Cru is going to be at 8 p.m. virtually and in the DUC Laird Room. We'll see you guys there.
Next, we're going to transition to our student speaker, which is Davis, and he's going to tell you a little bit more about his walk with the Lord.
Hello, my name is Davis Christensen. I'm a senior here at UW Stevens Point and majoring in soil and land management. And throughout my early childhood, I struggled to fit in, and Christianity was a far-off thing for me. I grew up in a split household where my mom was a believer and my dad was not. Some background about my family and me. I grew up in Oregon, Wisconsin, which is just south of Madison, and I have a pretty close relationship with my mom, dad, and my sister. And my sister lives in Ohio, and she just finished her getting her degree, and is older than me, and she is 24 years old. Before I received Jesus as a gift of salvation, I really didn't like going to church. I remember a few Sunday mornings where I'd even yell and get super upset, all because my mom was making me go to church. This stressed my mom and I's relationship along with some other factors. At this time in my life, I thought there might be a God, but I assumed he didn't care about me, and I didn't want him in my life. In 4th grade, I found my identity in friends, and I didn't mind going to school because I had friends who I talked to daily. However, the transition to 5th grade brought a new school in which 3 elementary schools were combined into one intermediate school. This change caused me to become shy because many of my good friends were now in different classes from me. Throughout the next couple of years, I didn't have many friends, and I was worried about what others would think of me. I felt lost, searching for something more. My whole life changed when one of my friends introduced me to pornography. This was the beginning of a new and challenging chapter of my life. Pornography would be something I would turn to when I was stressed, tired, etc., except that it would always leave me feeling empty. I was lost on the inside and looking for a purpose and a place to fit in. Throughout those years of my life, I attended a summer camp called Camp Fairwood, which is just about a half an hour south of here. I thoroughly enjoy going to Camp Fairwood every year because church was just much more enjoyable there. At that point in my life, my view of God was beginning to change. I began to be open to the idea of becoming a Christian. At Camp Fairwood, the speaker spoke with passion, and what he said seemed to jump out at me. One night, the preacher spoke about the realities of hell. I felt the godly presence during this message, and I knew I needed Jesus' death to cover up my sins and to save me from hell. During this, I remember thinking that I didn't want to truly become a Christian because I felt like God would want me to give all of my life to him. And after a short time, I decided to give my life to him because I know that he has already given his life for me. After accepting Jesus as the Lord of my life, I became a completely new man going into the 7th grade. I was constantly joyful, and I felt I could truly be myself again without worrying what others thought of me. I even enjoyed going to a new church called Hillcrest Bible Church. Although I still struggle with my relationship with my family and sexual purity, God was redeeming me through it all. In early high school, my relationship with my mom was pretty rocky. We fought often, and I thought we would never be able to get along. However, God laid this relationship with my mom on my heart, and I soon began to pray about the improvement of this relationship. And within a few months, my mom and I were talking on a daily basis, and currently my mom and I have a very good relationship. I probably talk to her every day through text and through phone and stuff. So a huge blessing that God has given me. A few years later, as I was on the way to Districts, a Christian youth conference in Green Bay, I found out that my grandpa had passed away. I initially thought that the timing couldn't have been any worse because I was going to be away from family all weekend and I had no way to get back home. Nonetheless, that weekend I grew in ways I'd never experienced before because I had no one to rely on but God. When I returned from that weekend, the Lord empowered me to start having a consistent time in prayer every day. Unlike other times after District's youth conference, when times in prayer or reading the Bible would taper off after a week or two, this time it became part of my life, and my life began to completely change. At this point in my life, my dad still had his doubts about this whole Christianity thing, but this was about to change. Sometime in the late spring or early summer, just a few months after his dad had passed away, my dad surrendered his life to Christ. He gave up all his stresses with work and in our family to God, who gladly took them all away. This changed our family dynamic and allowed us to seek God as a family. This aspect of community within faith is so important to our faith because when we are feeling discouraged, others can be there to pick us back up. And that was so important with our family too, and that we can all encourage each other in our faith and in our walks with God. Throughout high school, I was the typical kind of jock kind of guy, so I was consumed by sports. For me, it was either basketball, football, or lifting season. For some reason, people always assume I play basketball, but are surprised when I tell them I play football too. Actually, football was my favorite sport ever since I started playing in 8th grade. During my senior year of high school, Oregon was projected to be a contender for the conference championship. However, during the third game of the year, as I was playing defensive end, chasing after the running back, I got hit from the side and fell on my left arm, dislocating my elbow. At the ER, I got the devastating news that I would likely be out for the season. I was completely crushed. I felt like the life was totally sucked out of me. And I honestly don't think I cracked a good joke for weeks. I didn't want to believe what the doctor said and thought I could be back in a couple weeks. But as week after week went on, I began to realize that I may never play again. Fortunately, I was able to come back for the last game of the year, but it just didn't feel the same. I struggled with depression and felt lost for months after the season ended. I think this was because I had put my faith in something temporary instead of the one thing that is eternal. Looking back at this time in my life, I was certainly upset at God for allowing that to happen. And through this difficult time in my life, the Lord taught me many things. One of which was to never give up because the Lord will use all things together for our good. Another was to trust in the Lord because even when it seems He may have forgotten us, He will always be there for us. For the most part, I enjoyed high school because I played sports that I loved, had good friends, and didn't have to study too hard. However, this made the transition to college tough because I would leave all of that behind. The first couple weeks here were rough, as many of my friends, who for the most part went to Madison, were all hanging out still. I believe that God used that time of loneliness to encourage me to go to Cru and to reach out to people that I barely knew. I was able to meet a whole lot of good friends in Cru who truly care about me. And I would encourage you guys to do that too. All of you guys, new freshmen and stuff like that, just definitely stick around afterwards and like hang out and stuff. So we always do that afterwards, and we'd just love to get to know you guys. And during the second semester of my sophomore year of college, I hit a low point in my life. This was because of a breakup. After this, I struggled with low self-esteem and just a low view of myself for a while. I believe that this was because I blamed myself for things out of my control, and was putting too much identity in this relationship. Another awesome thing that I was a part of about a year ago was the summer mission. I got the opportunity to go to Perth, Australia to share about God's love for us and for other people of many different ethnicities. This was an incredible opportunity to grow in my faith and to meet just many people from different walks of life. And currently in my faith, I'm still struggling with a few things. Some of those things are pride and idealism of the Christian life. And throughout my life, I have held a couple verses close to my heart, one of which is Matthew 4:4, which says, "For man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." Another verse that I cherish is Romans 8:32, which says, "He who did not spare his own son for us, he who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also with him graciously give us all things?" With that, that's all I have. Would love to, again, meet you after Cru if there's an opportunity to do so, and thank you.
Hi, my name is Ryan.Naidl, and I've been helping to lead Cru here in central Wisconsin for about 15 or 16 years now. I've been on campus, started as a student at UW Stevens Point in 1998, and I'm going to be delivering the first message of Cru this semester. And so I'm glad you're checking us out, either online or in a group at our first meeting. Thanks for being a part of this. I can tell you I've been on campus for many falls in the last couple decades, and there's never obviously been a fall quite like this. But it's awesome to have students back on campus, and if you're tuning in via video from somewhere far, far away, we're grateful that you're able to take part in Cru this way as well. So thanks for being with us in whatever form that looks like. As you may have guessed, Cru is a ministry where we talk about God, and our first series this semester is going to be looking at some of the attributes of God and the character of God, what God is like. And maybe if this is your first time in a religious environment or an experience of thinking about God, or maybe if you haven't thought about God in a while, this might be like a little jarring to you, like, whoa, what have I gotten into? How did I end up here? Or maybe even if you grew up in a church where you talked about God a lot, it could still be a little like, man, whenever I hear people talking about God, they're angry about something or they're frustrated about something. And so it can kind of be overwhelming in our culture right now to even bring up the concept of God. But what I think is significant about the conversation is that I think in the background of our minds, we're always thinking about God. In fact, my first point tonight is that it's impossible not to think about God. So it's kind of a double negative, which as an English major I'm supposed to stay away from. But basically what I'm trying to say in that first point is that everyone's thinking about God at some point in their life. A.W. Tozer was an author, and he actually made the argument that what we think about God is the most important thing about us. And in the Old Testament of the Bible, in this very old book called Hosea, this prophet Hosea writes down God's words and says that my people, God's people, are destroyed because they don't know God, because they don't understand what God is like. In this day and age, I think thoughts about God have become pretty politicized, just like every other issue out there. But I want to encourage you guys to think about God outside of political dimensions. Thinking about God is not like giving your vote to a certain people group or being lumped into a specific category. Thoughts about God are extremely personal to us. How we think about God affects our mental health, our physical health, our financial health, our occupational health. How we think about God affects our dating relationships and our hobbies. How we think about God affects how we use our time and our money and our abilities. Our thoughts about God affect how we view our place in the world. And so it's extremely important that we don't just kind of lump ourselves into a certain place in life because of our thoughts about God, but that we are willing to explore what it means personally for us to know God, to understand who God is, to think about his characteristics. I think one of the major roadblocks in how we think about God is that thinking about God is not easy and it's not shallow. Thoughts on God are very deep and complicated, and sometimes they're cumbersome. Sometimes thinking about God is confusing. Sometimes we believe things about God's character that we understand maybe on a surface level. And then when we actually have experiences in life where we know it's like, well, I kind of expected God would handle it this way in my life, but when we actually experience it, it feels very different than what we expected. So thinking about God is not an easy thing. If God is real, and I believe he is, then God is big and deep and wide. And our experience of thinking about him is going to take a lot of brain work. It's going to take a lot of logic and a lot of A plus B equals C to comprehend who he is. And even at the end of that, we might not even scratch the surface. We won't even scratch the surface on how deep God is. So I think because of that, most people think about God based on how society tells us to think about God. And you may think, well, society doesn't talk a lot about God. Our schools don't talk about God. We can't really mention God in public spaces. But I would argue that we are always talking about God, regardless of if we're naming God specifically or not. I think every song that you listen to, every class that you're going to have this semester, every conversation that you have, every movie that you watch, in some way, shape, or form, is trying to tell you something about God. It may not be overt, as I mentioned earlier. It may not be something that mentions God by name. But it's telling you something. It's informing your worldview. And your worldview is how you perceive your world, which is, number one, formed off of your beliefs about God. And so the world that you live in is constantly telling you how to perceive your world, but you don't really realize that. You don't fully understand that. And so it's kind of, I've heard this illustration before, it's like two fish that are swimming side by side through a lake, and one fish looks at the other fish and says, the water's nice today, and the other fish looks back at that fish and says, what's water? And our worldview is like the water that we swim in, and sometimes we don't even realize it's there. But it's informing how we perceive our world. And at the base of that is how we perceive God. It's really popular in this day and age to say, you know, what you think about God might be different than what I think about God, but they can both be true. And that just doesn't make sense. We can't have opposing views about God and then see that they're both true. God has one true character. God has one true nature. The essence of who God is cannot contradict itself. God is true to himself, and God's character is true everywhere. And so that's a little overwhelming. That can be a little hard to swallow at times, because it's just a lot more politically correct to believe that God can be whatever you imagine him to be. But it doesn't really make sense that an elephant can be a bear or a tiger can be a lion. These are different things, and God can't just be anything we imagine him to be. God has to have one unique form. And so my first point tonight is that it's impossible not to think about God. We're always thinking about God. Even if it's not overt, even if we're not naming God by name, we are thinking about God. But my second point is that it's also impossible to know everything about God. And so when I was a student, I had an English class. I was an English major, and I had a professor named Dr. Sparapani. And I had an 8 a.m. class with Dr. Sparapani. One morning, I was sitting in that 8 a.m. class, and Dr. Sparapani decided to quote the book of Job. And he quoted this passage from Job 38, where if you know the story, maybe you don't, about this guy in the Bible named Job. He went through a bunch of really hard things, and God tested his character through those hard things. And at the end of the book, he's kind of asking God, why did I have to go through this? And God looks at Job, or at least the story lays it out that God responded to Job in this way. God says, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? On what were its footings set? Or who laid its cornerstone? While the morning stars sang together and all the angels shouted for joy. And so Job has experienced all this suffering and all this tragedy in his life. And God looks at him when Job begins to wonder why. And he says, you have to realize that there are things about me that are way beyond who you are. And that's what Dr. Sparapani was trying to get across to us that morning in English class. And so I took that home, and unbeknownst to me, I had been camping the weekend before, and I had picked up a parasite while I was camping, and I went home from class, and I had this picture of God as being this giant, mysterious figure in the universe. And I went home, and I started to feel quite sick, and within 2 hours, I was on the floor of my residence hall bathroom on my knees in front of the toilet. And you know what was going on. And I was sitting there feeling very, very awful. And I wanted to question God in that moment. I wanted to ask God, why did this have to happen to me? Because I was feeling terrible. I actually ended up in the ER later that day and had to get IV because I was so dehydrated. I was feeling awful. But in my mind, I remembered the words of Dr. Sparapani, and more so I remembered the words that God had preserved for us in the book of Job. And I remembered that God had a plan and has a plan, and it's beyond us to comprehend what that plan is. And so aspects of God are always going to be mysterious to us. Even in eternity, if we're with God in heaven and we can see God face to face, we're not going to know everything about God, even if we have all eternity to learn about him. God is the creator, and we are his creation. And the world is full of mystery. I think one of the greatest things, if I can say something good about this season that we're in of COVID-19, is that it's teaching all of us that none of us really know. 10 months ago, 12 months ago, a year ago, none of us pictured we'd be in this situation right now. And if we're honest with ourselves, that should be quite humbling to all of us. There's this concept, there's this word, it's called wonder. And I believe that fundamentally a piece of being human is this aspect called wonder. Wonder is the reality that you are a dependent creature, that I am a dependent creature, that you are finite, that I am finite. One day we will all breathe our last on planet Earth. Wonder is looking at a sunset and realizing that there are things that are far too profound in our life to understand. But wonder also says, I have to try and discover more, to learn and to comprehend. Wonder is the basis of all good things and right things in the world. Wonder is at the heart of exploration and at the heart of adventure. Wonder is the thing that causes us to ask the question, what lies beyond? Wonder is also at the heart of restoration. What could become of this item or this natural resource or this person if it was given the right attention? It's wonder that causes us to ask, how do we make things better in the universe? How do we make things better in the world? Wonder is also at the heart of humility, the simple embracing of a lack of understanding, but also the embracing that maybe we can try to understand, and maybe we can understand. Wonder pushes us to think and to dream. Wonder pushes us to hope and to work toward restoration. And at the heart of understanding who God is, and at the heart of understanding God's character, we have to be filled with wonder when we think about God. There are aspects of God that we can understand, that we can fight to embrace on deeper levels, and there are aspects of God we're never going to fully understand. And when we begin to look at God with wonder, when we begin to look at God and consider how big he is, and consider how he invites us into a relationship with him, we begin to see clues that God has left us in the universe, clues about who he is. I think the first clue that we have when it comes to understanding God is his creation. And there are three things in God's creation that always help me to understand who God is. The first thing is beauty. And in this season of COVID, my wife and I have been taking more walks, and we've been walking on the Green Circle Trail, which if you've just gotten to Stevens Point, you should spend some time either biking or walking or jogging on the Green Circle. It's an amazing thing that Stevens Point offers. But we spend time by McDill Pond taking walks and just being in God's glory in the universe in the mornings. And it fills our hearts with, his beauty fills our hearts with wonder. The second thing is music. I It's crazy because even nature just naturally makes music. But if you're a music lover like I am, I think music is one way God tries to embrace our hearts, tries to capture our hearts. And I see God in the music I listen to. Some of it's secular, some of it's written about God, but I can see God in the music that I listen to. And then the third place I see God in creation is just in laughter. The world's a pretty funny place. And even in this season of COVID, I think sometimes the best thing we can do is to try to laugh a little more. God's given us this ability as humans to laugh, and I think it's an important and significant thing that we laugh and laugh often and laugh well. So God has left us clues in creation about his character, who he is. The next place God has left us clues about himself is in the book he left us, which is the Bible. I don't have time to get into all the different complexities of the Bible, but the Bible is a super significant and very important book. And God has left us lots of clues about who he is in the Bible. But then the third place that God has left us clues about himself is in the person of Jesus Christ. I'm not sure where you're at with Jesus. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of Jesus before, or if you've understood his death and resurrection. And over our time together this semester at Cru, we're going to have the chance to talk more and more about Jesus and who he was and why he is significant even today, why he is at work in the world today, and how we can experience him more in our life. But Jesus revealed part of God's mystery in the world. One of the people that came after Jesus was a guy named Paul, and he wrote some letters in the Bible. And this is one of the things Paul wrote about Jesus. He said that the mystery that has been kept hidden for ages and generations is now disclosed to the world, disclosed to God's people, to whom God has chosen to make known among the world and the specific people, part of the world called the Gentiles, the glorious riches of this mystery, which is Christ in you, the hope of glory. And so this writer, Paul, is saying that there are lots of mysteries in the world, and God is mysterious to us. But God is revealing himself to us by allowing us to have a relationship with him through the person of Jesus Christ. And we can have that in our very lives. We can have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And that will begin to reveal God's mysteries in the world. We're going to talk more about that as the weeks go on, about what it means to have that personal relationship with Jesus Christ and what it means to know God through Jesus Christ. But I want you to come back and keep checking this out, whether it's online or in person. With Cru, we're a group of God seekers. And none of us, wherever you're at tonight, none of us in the Cru world have God figured out. We don't have God in a box. But we're growing to learn more about who God is, and we're growing to have a deeper relationship with God. We're growing to learn how to enjoy the good things God has left us in humanity. And so I would encourage you to continue to be a part of these groups. However you're meeting tonight, continue to come check that out for the rest of the semester. And we look forward to what God's going to do in and through us as we meet together. Thanks for being a part.
Thanks for tuning into Cru, guys. For our friends that are meeting us online, now is the time to hit your Zoom link and check in with your discussion leader. There you'll have your door prize card. For all of our friends that are meeting us in person in the CPS or the Laird room, your discussion leaders will now hand out your registration card for the door prize. So please fill those out, and we're going to pass out door prizes and get started with our discussion.
See you guys next Thursday.
Bye!